Across 17 star systems, the Keltharii Collective had spent the better part of 4 millennia perfecting the art of metallurgy. Their forges could manipulate matter at the molecular level, weaving alloys that defied conventional physics. Bridges spanning continents required no support columns. Starship hulls laughed at asteroid impacts. Their crown jewel, quantum-stabilized titanium, could withstand temperatures that would vaporize most planetary cores. So naturally, when a chunk of primitive Earth metal arrived at Forge Station Apex 7 and proceeded to humble their entire scientific establishment, the Keltharii did what any advanced civilization would do. They panicked quietly and called it a research opportunity. The station itself hung in the void like a metallic flower, its 12 petals serving as independent forge complexes. Each petal housed furnaces hot enough to liquefy stone, fabricators that could print molecular structures one atom at a time, and enough computing power to simulate the birth of stars. Thousands of metallurgists, engineers, and material scientists from across the collective worked here, pushing the boundaries of what matter could become. For the past 6 months, they'd been pushing against a boundary that refused to budge. The sample sat in a containment field in Laboratory 17, roughly the size of a human fist. Dark, layered patterns rippled across its surface like frozen water. Initial scans had been routine: carbon-based iron alloy, nothing remarkable; primitive smelting techniques, barely worthy of notation. The Keltharii senior analyst had nearly filed it under curiosity and moved on to more pressing matters. Then someone decided to stress test it. The cutting laser, designed to slice through quantum-stabilized titanium like warm butter, had bounced off the sample's edge, not absorbed, not melted, bounced. The technician running the test assumed equipment malfunction and recalibrated. Second attempt, same result. Third attempt, the laser array overheated and triggered emergency shutdown protocols. Word spread quickly in academic circles, especially when accompanied by phrases like impossible tensile strength and our instruments must be broken. Within a week, Forge Station Apex 7 had become the collective's worst-kept secret. Metallurgists arrived with theories. Engineers brought better equipment. Material scientists questioned their fundamental understanding of crystalline structures. The sample continued existing, utterly indifferent to their crisis. Forge Master Krixtal stood before the containment field now, all 4 of his optical stalks focused on the offending metal. His chromatic plates shifted through shades of frustrated purple. 40 years of experience, 12 published papers on exotic alloy matrices, and one particularly acclaimed treatise on molecular bonding under extreme conditions. None of it explained this. Behind him, 3 junior researchers monitored instruments that had been monitoring the same unchanging readings for months. The sample's atomic structure seemed straightforward enough. Iron, carbon, trace elements, basic stuff. The arrangement, though, the layers folded into each other in patterns that shouldn't provide the strength they measured. Their simulations couldn't replicate it. Their fabricators couldn't reproduce it. The worst part, the detail that kept Krixtal awake during his rest cycles, was the age. Spectroscopic analysis dated the sample to approximately 800 Earth years old. Pre-industrial, pre-spaceflight, pre-anything resembling modern metallurgy. Humans had made this with hammers and fire. The irony wasn't lost on the collective's scientific community. Here they stood, capable of forging materials at the quantum level, stumped by something a primitive species had casually produced centuries before discovering electricity. The academic papers were getting testy. Rival research teams had started making pointed comments at conferences. One particularly bold engineer from the Vrexian sovereignty had suggested perhaps the Keltharii weren't as advanced as their reputation implied. Krixtal's plates flushed angry orange at the memory. Which brought them to today's potential solution, or possibly today's fresh humiliation. The collective had done something unprecedented. They'd asked the humans for help. Not officially, of course. The request had been carefully worded as cultural exchange and collaborative research opportunity. But everyone knew what it meant. The galaxy's premier metallurgical institution was admitting it couldn't figure out primitive Earth metal. The human was due to arrive within the hour. Krixtal had reviewed her credentials with the enthusiasm of someone examining their own autopsy report. Bachelor's degree from some institution called MIT. Master's work in materials engineering. Dissertation on traditional forging techniques and their modern applications. She'd spent 3 years working in what humans called a blacksmith shop, which appeared to be a shed containing fire and heavy objects. This was their expert. This was who Earth sent to unravel a mystery that had occupied their finest minds for half a year. The docking alerts chimed. Krixtal's optical stalks drooped slightly. Several junior researchers exchanged glances that needed no translation across species. The universal expression for, "this should be interesting," looked remarkably similar whether you had 2 eyes or 4. Transport Tube 7 connected with a pressurized hiss, and humanity's representative stepped onto Forge Station Apex 7. She was short by human standards, which meant roughly chest height to Krixtal. Dark hair pulled back functionally, clothing that seemed designed for utility rather than appearance. She carried a single bag over one shoulder and moved with the casual confidence of someone who'd navigated unfamiliar spaces before. Her eyes swept the laboratory once, cataloging equipment and personnel with professional efficiency. No ceremony, no formal greetings. She simply walked up to the containment field, peered at the sample for exactly 3 seconds, and smiled. That smile worried Krixtal more than 6 months of failed experiments. "Right," she said, her tone carrying the dangerous calm of someone about to ruin everyone's day. "Before we start, quick question. You've been trying to figure out how to make this, yeah?" Krixtal's translator chip rendered her accent into something approximating formal Keltharii, but stripped of the sarcasm he suspected lived in the original phrasing. "We have been attempting to understand and replicate its unique properties. Yes, the molecular structure defies our modeling systems. The strength-to-weight ratio seems thermodynamically implausible. Our fabricators cannot reproduce the crystalline patterns." She nodded, still smiling that worrying smile. "And you've been approaching it with quantum stabilization, molecular printing, atomic-level manipulation?" "Naturally, those are standard methodologies for advanced alloy creation." "Right, standard, advanced." She set her bag down and turned to face him fully. "This is going to be fun. So here's the thing about your impossible steel." The pause stretched just long enough to make every researcher in the laboratory lean forward unconsciously. "It's called Damascus, and my uncle makes these every weekend in his garage." The silence that followed could have choked a supernova. Krixtal's chromatic plates cycled through 3 different shades of confused before settling on a mottled gray that roughly translated to, "Please repeat that because my translator must be malfunctioning." "Your uncle," he said slowly, "makes these in his garage on weekends." "Yep." She popped the P sound with what Krixtal was beginning to recognize as deliberate provocation. "Has a little forge set up in the back. Nothing fancy. Propane burner, anvil he bought at an estate sale, hammer collection that's honestly gotten out of hand. Mom keeps telling him he needs a new hobby, but he says hitting hot metal with other metal is therapeutic." One of the junior researchers made a sound like air escaping from a damaged pressure seal. The human continued as if she hadn't just casually demolished 6 months of academic discourse. "Damascus steel, pattern-welded steel, whatever you want to call it. Technique's been around since, way before we figured out which end of the sword goes in the other guy. Ancient smiths in what we now call Syria perfected it around 300 BCE, give or take. Lost the technique for a while during the whole medieval period, probably because someone forgot to write down the recipe and then died. Happens more than you'd think in metallurgy." She walked closer to the containment field, examining the sample with the air of someone identifying a familiar brand of cereal at a grocery store. Modern recreation started popping up again in the 1800s. Bunch of bladesmiths got obsessed with figuring out how the old masters did it. Trial and error mostly, Some chemistry, lots of swearing. Krixtall felt his grasp on reality slipping like a wrench on oiled metal. But the molecular structure, the layering patterns, our computer models indicate this should require precision atomic manipulation to achieve these bonding properties. Nah, you just need patience and a decent sense of rhythm. She tapped the containment field's display panel, pulling up the microscopic analysis. See these layers? That's from forge welding. You take 2 or more types of steel, heat them until they're almost liquid, hammer them together, fold the whole thing, heat it again, hammer again, repeat until your arms hurt or you lose count. Folding. Krixtall's translator struggled with his tone. You're describing folding. Well, yeah, my uncle does 15 to 20 folds usually. Says anything more is just showing off. Each fold doubles the layers, so by fold 15 you're looking at 32,000 layers or so. Basic exponential math. A junior researcher dropped a data pad. The clatter echoed through the laboratory like a death knell for the collective's reputation. The human pulled out her personal tablet, a device that looked primitive next to the holographic displays surrounding them. She swiped through photos with the casualness of someone sharing vacation pictures. Here, this is from last month. That's my uncle at his forge. That blade there, the one with the wavy pattern, 16 folds. Took him about 6 hours, but he stopped halfway through to argue with the neighbor about fence height, so probably more like 4 hours of actual work. Krixtall stared at the image, a middle-aged human man wearing something called a world's okayest blacksmith apron, grinning at the camera while holding up a blade that displayed the exact same rippling patterns as their impossible sample. Behind him, the garage looked less like a sophisticated laboratory and more like a shed that had surrendered to entropy. The different shades in the pattern come from different carbon content in the steel layers, she continued, mercifully unaware she was systematically destroying Krixtall's worldview. High carbon, low carbon, high carbon, low carbon. When you etch it with acid, the different layers react differently, creates the visible pattern. It's pretty, sure, but the real benefit is structural. The alternating layers give you flexibility and hardness. Blade won't shatter when it hits something solid, but keeps a wicked edge. Acid, Krixtall repeated faintly. You use acid. Usually ferric chloride. Some people get fancy with coffee or vinegar. Uncle prefers the chloride because he says coffee should be for drinking, not metalworking, which honestly is rich coming from a guy who keeps a pot going in the forge all day. She zoomed in on another photo showing the step-by-step process. Heat, hammer, fold, heat, hammer, fold. The motions looked almost meditative. Absolutely nothing suggested quantum physics or molecular printing or any of the advanced techniques the collective had been throwing at the problem. The technique isn't even complicated, she said, warming to her subject in the way humans did when discussing their particular obsessions. Tricky, sure, requires practice. Temperature control matters. Too hot and the steel burns, too cold and it won't weld properly. You've got to feel it more than measure it. Watch the color, listen to the hammer strike, pay attention to how the metal moves. Feel it. Krixtall had spent 4 decades working with precision instruments calibrated to 17 decimal places. You're telling me the secret to creating a material that has baffled our finest scientific minds is to feel it. Well, when you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous. She grinned at him, and Krixtall realized with creeping horror that she was enjoying this. But yeah, basically, humans have been working metal by feel since we figured out fire makes rocks soft. It's not high science, it's just paying attention and not rushing the process. One of the researchers finally found their voice, but the crystalline matrix alignment. The grain structure achieves optimal stress distribution through geometric patterns that shouldn't occur naturally in manual fabrication. Right, that happens because of the folding and the temperature cycling. She pulled up a simple diagram on her tablet, the kind that might appear in an educational children's program. Every time you heat and cool the steel, the grain structure reorganizes. Do it enough times while mechanically working the metal, and the grains align along stress lines. It's not random. The metal wants to arrange itself efficiently. You're just giving it opportunities to figure itself out. The researcher looked like they wanted to argue but couldn't find a foothold in the casual logic. My uncle's got about 40 blades at home, she continued. Kitchen knives mostly, some decorative pieces. Sells them at craft fairs when my aunt makes him clear out inventory. Goes for about 200 to 500 credits depending on size and complexity. Guy bought one last year to use as a letter opener. 200 credits for a letter opener made from your impossible steel. Crixtall felt something fundamental crack in his understanding of the universe. They'd assembled task forces, diverted resources, called in experts from across 12 systems, published papers, held conferences. One engineer had quit academia entirely over this mystery, and humans made it in garages, for letter openers, on weekends. I'm starting to understand, Crixtall said slowly, why your species makes the rest of the galaxy nervous. She laughed, the sound bright and entirely too cheerful for someone dismantling an institution's credibility. Oh, you haven't even heard about what we do with woodworking yet. Wait until you find out about
Japanese joinery. Those guys build entire temples without a single nail or screw, just wood fitting into wood so precisely it lasts centuries. Been doing it since before we had telescopes. The junior researchers exchanged glances that communicated a single unified thought. Maybe they should have stayed in quantum physics where things made sense. So, she said, turning back to the containment field with an expression that suggested she was about to make everything worse. Want me to show you how it's done? Fair warning, it's going to make your advanced fabrication systems look a bit silly. But on the bright side, you'll finally understand why your molecular printers kept failing. Crixtall's plates shifted to a color that didn't have a proper translation but roughly meant resignation mixed with morbid curiosity. Please, he said, because sometimes the only way through horror was straight ahead. Demonstrate. The preparation took longer than the actual forging, which should have been everyone's first clue about how this would go. She stood in front of Forge Complex 3, surrounded by enough technological sophistication to build starship components, and began making a list, a physical list, on paper, with a pen. Right, I'll need 2 types of steel, one high carbon, around 1.2%, one low carbon, maybe 0.4%. Doesn't have to be fancy. Whatever you use for basic structural work is fine. The materials specialist looked personally offended. We have 17 proprietary alloy blends available, each one optimized for specific stress parameters and thermal. Just give me regular steel, the boring kind. We don't stock boring steel. She blinked. You're a forge station. How do you not have regular steel? We moved past basic ferrous alloys 3 centuries ago. Everything here is enhanced, stabilized, or quantum locked. Of course it is, she rubbed her temples. Okay, fine. Give me your least enhanced steel. Pretend I'm building a fence or something equally disappointing. 10 minutes of database searching finally produced suitable materials, sourced from a mining outpost that apparently still used primitive refining methods. The metallurgist who retrieved them looked like he was handling contaminated samples. Next, I need a forge that just makes things hot. No molecular stabilization, no quantum anything, just heat. Crixtall gestured to a fabrication unit capable of generating plasma temperatures. This can produce any thermal output you require. Can it be a box that gets hot when I want it hot? That seems inefficient. That's literally all forges do. They're angry boxes that make metal soft. They eventually jury-rigged one of the testing furnaces, disabled approximately 40 safety features, and removed the automated temperature regulation. The technician configuring it looked like he was defusing a bomb while blindfolded. Hammer, anvil, something to hold hot metal that isn't my hands. The Keltharii didn't have hammers. Why would they? Precision fabricators didn't require percussive force.
After 20 minutes of explanation, someone welded a handle onto a tungsten weight usually used for calibrating gravitational sensors. The anvil came from a structural support beam, cut free and mounted at waist height. Tongs were created by bending a manipulator arm into submission. By the time she had her requested tools, word had spread through the station. Researchers from other departments lined the observation gallery. Someone was streaming this to the collective's academic network. A materials science professor from the Vrexian sovereignty sent a message asking if this was performance art. She arranged her primitive setup with the satisfaction of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. 2 bars of steel, forge roaring hot, hammer resting on the improvised anvil. "Okay," she said, addressing the crowd like this was a cooking demonstration rather than the potential dismantling of advanced metallurgical theory. "Damascus steel in, let's say, 30 minutes. Questions before we start?" Krixtal had many questions. Philosophical questions, questions about the nature of progress and whether his career had been an elaborate joke. But he asked the practical one. "Will this actually work?" She grinned, grabbed the tongs, and shoved both steel bars into the forge. "Let's find out." The steel glowed orange, then yellow, then white. She pulled both pieces out, laid them atop each other on the anvil, and swung the hammer. The clang echoed through the observation deck like a declaration of war against modernity. Heat, stack, hammer, fold, repeat. No calculations, no sensor readings. She watched the color of the metal and listened to the sound of each strike. When a junior researcher tried to approach with a thermal scanner, she waved him off without looking. "Temperature's fine. I can tell by the shadow the forge throws on the metal." Krixtal wanted to argue that shadows were not precision instruments. He kept quiet, mostly because arguing with results felt pointless. 15 folds took 28 minutes. She quenched the final piece in oil that the chemistry department had reluctantly provided, let it cool, then held it up to the light. The characteristic wavy pattern rippled across the surface, identical to their impossible sample. She tossed it to Krixtal. He caught it reflexively, optical stalks widening. "There's your mystery. 30 minutes, basic materials, techniques older than your station by about 7,000 years. The laboratory existed in stunned silence. Someone in the observation gallery dropped something. The live stream's viewer count had apparently crashed the academic network twice. Krixtal turned the steel over in his hands. Scans would confirm what he already knew. Molecular structure, identical. Layering patterns, identical. Strength properties, identical. They'd overthought it, spectacularly, completely. Their advanced fabricators tried to build the pattern atom by atom, fighting against the natural behavior of heated metal. She'd simply let the metal do what it wanted, while guiding the process with heat and force. "We've been approaching metallurgy wrong," he said quietly. "Not wrong, just differently." She packed her tools, movements efficient. "Your technology is incredible for what it does, but sometimes the old ways work because they work with the material's nature instead of against it. Steel wants to fold and layer when you treat it right. You were trying to force it into patterns instead of letting it find them." A message alert chimed on his workstation. The Vrexian Sovereignty Metallurgy Department requesting detailed documentation of the process. Then another from the Engineering Guild. Then 6 more from various research institutions. She hefted her bag and grinned. "Oh, and since we're sharing human weekend hobbies, wait until you hear about our amateur astronomers. Half the exoplanets your scientists are discovering. Backyard telescope enthusiasts found them first." Krixtal's plates faded to white, the Keltharii equivalent of a system reboot. She walked toward the transport tube, pausing at the doorway. "My uncle's got a forge building guide online if you want to set up your own. Free download. He calls it Hitting Metal Good, a beginner's journey into acceptable craftsmanship." The door sealed behind her, leaving Laboratory 17 in contemplative silence. Somewhere on Earth, in a cluttered garage that smelled of coal smoke and coffee, a middle-aged man was probably folding his 17th blade of the month. Completely unaware, he'd just humbled galactic civilization's finest minds. And somehow, Kriegstall suspected, that made it even worse. 3 months after the demonstration, the Keltharii Collective quietly updated their research protocols. The new directive, buried in administrative documentation where embarrassing admissions go to die, suggested consulting with species about their traditional methods before assuming technological superiority. They called it the Historical Context Integration Initiative. Everyone else called it the Maybe Ask the Humans First protocol. Forge Station Apex 7 now maintained a small workshop in Complex 12, equipped with what the staff referred to as therapeutic primitive equipment. Kriegstall visited twice a week, hammering heated metal with the focused intensity of someone working through profound existential questions. His latest blade displayed 14 folds and only minor asymmetry. The original sample remained in its containment field, now labeled Damascus steel, Terran origin, circa 1200 CE, probable weekend project. Tour groups passed by regularly. It had become something between a cautionary tale and a monument to the dangers of overthinking. The human metallurgist had returned to Earth, presumably to laugh about this with her uncle over garage-brewed coffee. Her final report contained one footnote that kept Kriegstall awake during rest cycles. For your next impossible material investigation, I recommend checking if humans do it as a hobby first. Saves time. The attachment included a link to something called wood-turning videos and a cheerful warning about Japanese joinery. Kriegstall hadn't clicked it yet. Some revelations required proper mental preparation.